My name is Emmanuel Obang, and I'm doing a speech on Iron Jawed Angels. Iron Jawed Angels was a movie based on the suffrage of women, women's rights, and women's rights to vote. Essentially, what that was is a group called the NAWSA formed together to fight against the government and other people to fight for women's rights and women's rights to vote, because during the 1910 or 1900s, I'll say, women weren't treated right and they didn't have a fair chance. They didn't have the jobs that men had. They didn't have the right chance to do certain things that men could do, and that wasn't fair at the time. And I still think that that's something going on right now as we speak, during our era. Essentially, this movie ultimately connects to the chapter that we read on chapter 31 on why do movements decline. And this was something that was brought to me throughout the whole movie, that after reading that chapter, I realized throughout the whole movie that this was a big occurrence that happened during the movie. And that occurrence was basically in chapter 31. They asked, why do movements decline? And basically it said in chapter 31 that movements may also decline as a result of their own internal dynamics and evolution. And then also it said that the women's movement gradually lost its radical vision on what they were trying to accomplish during that time and what they were trying to have happen during that time. And I feel like watching throughout that movie, they had many occurrences to happen that caused them to decline and not only halt their movement, but put a timestamp on their movement, a longer timestamp on their movement than where they expected to be during the time. One example of this would be the characters, like I named before, Alice Paul and Lucy Burns. They were two women that were also in charge of NAWSA. They were women that helped out with fundraising and setting up events, and as well as putting their 2 cents in. And these women were very corrupt throughout the whole movie. One of them being Alice Paul. She actually while she was with the NAWSA, she actually told a African American woman named Ida Wells that she wanted her and her group of African American women to walk in the back of the group during a parade, and that was reasoning to stop the Democrats from being upset with them, and I guess ultimately going against what the Democrats viewed as to be okay. And my thought with that was, if they were, as women as a whole, not looking at race and other things, if they were women as whole that weren't looking at race, then why would they want these African American women walking behind the parade? Why would they not have them all walking together as one and seem as a whole one unit instead of separate, or ultimately segregated? And this is during the time when segregation was very big. So why would you be fighting for women's rights when you're not showing that you are treating women equally as well as you're trying to fight for it? And that was something that played a big part in it, that a lot of people didn't notice, that they were still being discriminated against women. But not only just women, but African American women were being discriminated against in a separate wholesome. Another example that happened during the whole movie that also helped, that was connected with the chapter for the decline of their movement, was after that march, the ladies raised money for the NAWSA, and ultimately they did that on the side without even consulting with any of the members in there. And they did this just to get a article in the paper to recruit women to help not only join their movement, but also just recruit women to protest against President Wilson, which was at the time someone that they did not want to be president because he didn't view women's rights as to be equal. And they wanted to get women together to protest against it, and they thought that Alice Paul and Lucy Burns thought this would be a good idea to go ahead and go against everyone and get in the paper to have women join to revolt against this president. And their view at the time, the NAWSA, was not to attack any political members or anything like that. They wanted to be more of a less soft-spoken group when it came to politics, and let others have their own view on certain things, and they didn't want to really change anybody else's thoughts. Which also leads me to my next point, example number 3, which is basically what I like to call romance in the workplace. In order for Alice Paul to get that article in the paper, she actually met with a man named Ben Weisman, and he was a political cartoonist in the newspaper. And basically what he did was he had a article or a portion in the newspaper that she knew that he could do whatever freedom he wanted to with it. So she actually created this whole romance with the man, just to basically essentially get what she wanted, which was to get that article in the paper about this whole protest and boycott against President Wilson. And that didn't help out their movement, because this honestly ended up blowing back up in her face, because she ended up realizing that she didn't like the man because he had a kid, and she still agreed with all these things, making false hopes and promises for this man when she was doing it for a whole nother hidden agenda. And that actually didn't ultimately even help that much, because following up after doing that, after realizing that they were collecting fundraising money underneath the NAWSA's policy, and underneath their nose, her and Lucy ended up getting kicked out, which leads me to my next point. After they got kicked out, Allison and Burns, they basically formed the NWP, which is the National Women's Party, and they did that just because they wanted to get back at the NAWSA for kicking them out. And basically, ultimately, they formed this group just to revolt against each other and cause a whole bunch of argument between each other, and criticizing each other and calling each other out, and telling other women that this is not what we view and this is the right way to view it, and saying that this group's wrong and the other group's wrong. And ultimately that slowed the movement down big time, because they're not being equal or showing each other that they're equal, and they're not showing that they're together on this. They were slowing down the movement by them going against each other when they should be going together to fight against this movement for women's rights and for women's rights to vote. And that wasn't something that they did. They went against each other using separate tactics to sabotage each other ultimately. And that really took a big hurt in the whole movement of women's rights for them, and ultimately slowed it down. And they lost, just like it said in the chapter, they lost their vision of what they wanted to do and accomplish. And they let a whole bunch of series of things interfere with that, and it could have been easily prevented if they all were on the same page and they all realized that they all have one big view on something, that they should come together as one, put all their differences aside, and say, we're women as a whole, and we want to be this, and we're going for this certain outcome, and set a goal and accomplish it. But they didn't do that, and that caused a lot of problems, and that caused ultimately their movement to slow down, just like it was said in chapter 31. Ultimately, just to hit home